The Cold War was not only a clash of ideologies, but also a theater of fear where every shadow could hide a threat, and every silence could be broken by the roar of engines or the flash of nuclear fire. In that fragile balance of terror, knowledge was as valuable as weapons, and whoever could see deeper, higher, and further would hold the advantage. In May 1960, the world understood this truth in the most humiliating way possible for the United States. A U-2 spy plane piloted by Francis Gary Powers was torn from the sky by a Soviet missile. Washington had believed the U-2 to be untouchable, soaring above enemy defenses, but in a single strike, Moscow revealed not only the vulnerability of American technology, but also the vulnerability of American pride. The pilot was captured alive, paraded in a show trial, and the myth of invincibility crumbled in front of the entire world. If the Blackbird can outrun missiles, you can surely outrun that little red subscribe button. Click it before it locks onto you. For the American public, it was a scandal, but for the intelligence community, it was an earthquake. If the U-2 could be brought down, what else was exposed? How many secrets could be lost before catastrophe struck? The Soviet Union was advancing, building more powerful missiles, deploying radar networks that stretched across its vast land, and expanding its nuclear arsenal. Every miscalculation could mean millions of lives erased in seconds. The Central Intelligence Agency needed answers. They needed eyes that no enemy could close, a machine that no missile could catch. They needed something faster than fear itself. Enter Clarence Kelly Johnson, the brilliant and stubborn head of Lockheed's Skunk Works. Johnson was not a man of patience. He thrived on impossibilities. When told that an aircraft could not exist, he quietly began sketching blueprints to prove the opposite. He and his small, secretive team worked out of a modest building in Burbank, California, far from the polished offices of corporate America. Their workplace smelled of coffee, cigarette smoke, and hot metal. Their culture was simple: speed over bureaucracy, results over paperwork, genius over tradition. Within those walls, a new dream was born, a dream not of just another reconnaissance aircraft, but of a machine that could laugh at the boundaries of physics. The concept was radical. Instead of flying just above enemy air defenses, the new aircraft would fly beyond them entirely, racing past the edge of the stratosphere. Instead of hiding behind tricks of maneuver, it would depend on pure velocity, moving so fast that any missile launched against it would already be chasing a ghost. Johnson called this philosophy higher, faster, farther, and it demanded an aircraft unlike anything humanity had ever built. Every rivet, every panel, every bolt would need to resist heat that could melt aluminum and stress that could shatter steel. It was an idea as dangerous as it was brilliant, and for many it sounded like madness. But madness has a way of seducing visionaries. By the early 1960s, the CIA funded the secret program codenamed Oxcart. A name as bland as the aircraft was extraordinary. The prototype that emerged from this program was called the A-12, a sleek, dagger-shaped craft designed to slice through the sky at speeds above Mach 3. It was built almost entirely of titanium, a metal so rare in the United States that the government had to secretly acquire it from Soviet sources through disguised third-party companies. Imagine the irony. The USSR unknowingly supplying the very metal that would be used to spy on its own territory. This detail alone reveals the strangeness of the Cold War, a time when enemies fueled each other's nightmares without even realizing it. The A-12 was never intended to be the final form. It was a testbed, a secret rehearsal for something greater. Test flights pushed pilots to the edge of human endurance. At speeds over 3,000 kilometers per hour, the windshield glowed white-hot. The fuselage stretched several inches from the heat, and fuel leaked constantly from the seams on the ground because the aircraft was designed to seal itself only at extreme temperatures. Every mission was a gamble, but every success whispered of the impossible becoming possible. For the CIA, the A-12 was proof of concept. For the engineers at Skunk Works, it was the spark of a legend waiting to be born. Yet even within those guarded hangars, the sense of vulnerability lingered. They knew the Soviets were improving their interceptors and missiles. They knew radar coverage was tightening like a net. The United States could not afford another U-2 incident, not another public humiliation. The next aircraft would need not just speed, but reliability, not just secrecy, but endurance. It had to be an aircraft capable of serving openly with the United States Air Force, not hidden away in the shadows of the CIA. It had to be more than a prototype. It had to be a weapon of prestige, a symbol that would terrify adversaries by its very existence. This was the moment when the A-12 evolved into something else, something bigger. Something that would soon be known by a name that carried both mystery and menace, the SR-71 Blackbird. It was not yet unveiled, not yet revealed to the public or to the world, but within the minds of its creators it had already taken flight. The foundations were set, the challenges were known, and the race against time and against fear had officially begun. And as the engineers prepared to shape the impossible into reality, one question haunted them all. Could this machine truly outrun history itself? The SR-71 was born out of secrecy, but once it emerged, it no longer looked like any aircraft humanity had ever seen. Its silhouette alone seemed unreal, stretched long and lean like a blade forged for the skies, its surfaces angled in ways that reflected not the aesthetics of design, but the hard mathematics of survival. This was not a plane meant to be admired on the ground. It was meant to disappear in motion, to become a blur above the clouds that no radar could lock onto and no missile could ever reach. It was not only a weapon of reconnaissance, it was a statement. When it rolled out of the hangar for the first time, even seasoned engineers stared in silence, as if they were looking at something that had slipped forward from the future. The choice of materials was as audacious as the shape. To survive the searing heat of flying above Mach 3, traditional aluminum was useless. It would buckle, melt, and deform under the extreme thermal stress. The only option was titanium, a metal so difficult to work with that almost every tool in the factory had to be reinvented. Drills snapped, saws dulled, and welding techniques had to be created from scratch. The irony that much of this titanium came from the Soviet Union through covert purchasing operations only adds to the legend. The very nation being spied upon was unknowingly feeding the body of the bird that would haunt its skies. This paradox alone shows how entangled and strange the chessboard of the Cold War truly was. Its skin was not just black for intimidation. The jet was painted in a special heat-dissipating black coating that absorbed radar waves and helped radiate away the extreme heat of air friction. At full speed, sections of the fuselage reached temperatures higher than the surface of a pizza oven. Panels expanded, joints stretched, and the aircraft literally grew a few inches longer in flight. On the runway before takeoff, fuel streamed from its seams like sweat. But this leaking was not a flaw. It was part of the design. Only when the aircraft heated in flight would the titanium expand and seal itself tight, preventing catastrophic loss of fuel. To anyone watching the SR-71 prepare for flight, it must have looked like a wounded machine bleeding on the tarmac, only to transform into a perfect predator once it reached its true environment. At its heart roared the Pratt and Whitney J58 engines, perhaps the most remarkable engines ever mounted on a jet. Officially classified as turbojets, they behaved more like something between a jet engine and a ramjet, a hybrid so unusual it still fascinates engineers today. At lower speeds, they functioned like normal turbojets, compressing air with fans before combustion. But as velocity increased, the airflow itself became a weapon. At Mach 3, more than 80% of the thrust came not from the turbines, but from the shock cones and bypassed ducts that redirected supersonic air straight into the afterburner. The SR-71's engines were not just power plants. They were metamorphic organs, transforming their very nature as the speed climbed, as though the airplane itself was evolving mid-flight into a different creature. That transformation allowed the Blackbird to cruise comfortably above Mach 3, reaching altitudes near 85,000 feet. From that height, the curvature of the Earth was visible to the naked eye, the sky darkened into indigo, and the pilots floated on the edge of space. Yet the cockpit environment was anything but tranquil. The pilots wore pressure suits nearly identical to those used by astronauts, their visors coated in gold to shield against the blinding glare of the sun at altitude. Every minute in the cockpit demanded focus. At such speeds, a single second of inattention meant the aircraft could cover nearly a mile. In training, pilots joked grimly that if you saw a problem light up on the console at Mach 3, by the time you reacted, you were already 20 miles past the point where it began. What the SR-71 carried into the stratosphere was just as remarkable as the machine itself. The nose and belly were packed with cameras and sensors so advanced that they could capture images sharp enough to reveal the painted lines on a runway from more than 20 kilometers above. The lenses were designed to adjust for the blur of supersonic flight, compensating for the fact that the plane was moving faster than a bullet. One flight over hostile territory could photograph hundreds of thousands of square miles in a single mission. In an era before satellites became dominant, this ability gave the United States a window into enemy secrets that was unmatched. Every roll of film the Blackbird carried home was as valuable as gold, containing intelligence that could shift military strategies and political negotiations alike. The enemy, of course, never accepted its presence quietly. In Vietnam alone, the SR-71 was targeted by over 800 surface-to-air missiles. Each launch was a desperate attempt to clip the wings of the bird, but each ended the same way, the missile falling hopelessly behind as the Blackbird surged ahead, climbing, accelerating, and vanishing. Pilots described the warning alarms in their helmets, the flashes of launches on the ground below, and the knowledge that, at that speed, the only defense was to do nothing but keep going. To climb, to turn, or to slow down would be death. The only safety was in trusting the machine, trusting that its speed was greater than the fear boiling in their veins. Every mission was a gamble against physics, and every safe return only deepened the legend that this aircraft could not be caught. But legends often conceal the fragility behind them. The Blackbird, though untouchable in the sky, was also a delicate giant. It demanded careful handling, specialized maintenance, and an army of technicians who knew that a single overlooked detail could spell disaster. The fuel itself, JP7, was so heat-resistant that it could not ignite with a spark alone. To start the engines, the crew had to inject a chemical called triethylborane, which burst into a violent green flame at contact with air. Each ignition sounded like a cannon shot, shaking the ground as the J-58s roared to life. This ritual was both thrilling and terrifying, a reminder that flying the SR-71 was always a dance with forces just barely under control. Despite its challenges, the Blackbird's presence was more than military. It was psychological. For every leader in the Kremlin who knew that somewhere above their borders, a silent observer was recording every move, the SR-71 was a ghost. It was proof that America could see into the heart of its enemies no matter how deep they tried to hide. And for the pilots who climbed into its cockpit, it was more than a machine. It was an initiation into a brotherhood of men who rode on fire at the edge of space, who felt the earth curve beneath them and the stars peek into view above. They knew that they were sitting inside the fastest air-breathing aircraft ever built, and that knowledge alone was both a comfort and a burden. Every aspect of the SR-71 spoke of contradictions, fragile yet invincible, complex yet elegant, a secret built from stolen secrets, a bird that leaked on the ground but became flawless in the sky. It was as if the plane existed in two realities at once, a mechanical paradox made flesh in titanium and fire. And yet, even as it seemed immortal, another truth was waiting in the shadows. Greatness always carries a cost. The higher the Blackbird soared, the more resources it demanded, and the closer the day of reckoning approached when someone would have to decide if even legends could be afforded forever. The aircraft was untouchable in combat, but its greatest battle was not against missiles or enemies. It was against time, money, and the weight of politics. And that battle was still waiting to be fought. The Blackbird's legend was built on speed and invulnerability, but beneath that aura of perfection lay an aircraft that demanded a staggering price to exist. Every mission was not only a triumph of engineering, but also a logistical miracle, one that required an army of ground crew, fleets of tankers, warehouses of specialized equipment, and budgets that could drain entire programs. To keep a single SR-71 aloft meant orchestrating hundreds of moving parts, each dependent on the other, each costly, each fragile. The irony was brutal. The airplane that outran missiles and defied enemies could never outrun the weight of its own expenses. The fuel that kept it alive was unlike any other. JP-7 was a liquid designed not for convenience, but for survival at extreme temperatures. It was so stable that you could drop a lit match into a bucket of it, and the flame would go out. The Blackbird's engines needed a separate chemical, triethylborane, to ignite it, an exotic substance that exploded into a violent green flame when it touched air. Each engine start required a measured shot of this volatile fluid, a reminder that even before it left the ground, the aircraft existed in a delicate balance between genius and danger. Because the engines burned JP-7 so quickly, every SR-71 mission relied on mid-air refueling. The modified KC-135Q tankers became lifelines, carrying the only fuel that could satisfy the beast. Without them, the SR-71 could barely reach the edge of its mission envelope. With them, it could span continents. But this dependence turned every flight into a ballet of timing, geography, and coordination. If a tanker missed its mark or weather intervened, the most advanced aircraft in the world could be left with no choice but to abort. It wasn't just the fuel that drained resources. The SR-71's maintenance cycles were notorious. Heat expansion warped panels, rivets had to be checked constantly, and the skin of the plane endured stresses that no other airframe on Earth experienced. Ground crews worked endless hours in specialized suits, often replacing entire sections, just to ensure the jet could survive another flight. Hangars smelled of scorched titanium and hydraulic fluids, and the aircraft stood there like a wounded predator, bleeding fuel and demanding care before it could take to the sky again. Veterans of those maintenance crews often said the bird was not a machine, but a living creature, one that had to be nursed back to health before each mission. This cost was not only material, but political. In Washington, debates raged over whether the Blackbird's intelligence justified its expense. Satellites were advancing quickly, offering global surveillance without risk to pilots and without the need for reams of fuel and fleets of support aircraft. Politicians and generals argued, was the SR-71 a symbol of American supremacy, or was it an extravagant relic of a passing era? Each budget cycle became a fight for survival, with advocates pointing to the plane's unmatched capabilities and detractors citing its astronomical bills. At times, the aircraft was retired only to be brought back again, as crises reminded leaders that satellites could not always deliver what a manned, high-speed, real-time spy plane could. Despite the constant threats of cancellation, the Blackbird delivered time and again. It flew missions over the Middle East, monitoring conflicts and tensions that satellites could not capture in the same detail. It scouted the demilitarized zone in Korea, capturing every ripple of movement on the ground. In 1986, during the Libyan crisis, SR-71 streaked across hostile skies to gather intelligence that would shape American strategy. Each time it was called upon, it delivered, and each time it proved that no other aircraft in the world could quite replace it. But with every successful mission, the paradox deepened. It was indispensable, but it was unsustainable. The pilots who flew it felt this contradiction deeply. They spoke with reverence of the speed, of watching missiles spiral helplessly behind them, of flying so high that the stars emerged against a black sky. Yet they also knew the machine demanded everything from those who touched it. The suits they wore resembled those of astronauts because at 85,000 feet the atmosphere was too thin to breathe, and a sudden decompression could kill in seconds. Their training drilled into them not only how to fly, but how to survive the unimaginable. They lived with the constant knowledge that the margin for error was thinner than a sheet of paper. Each successful landing was celebrated not as routine, but as a victory against the odds. Eventually, the odds of politics caught up to the program. By the late 1990s, the arguments against the SR-71 grew louder. Satellites offered persistence and coverage. Drones hinted at a new future. The Blackbird's supporters fought to save it, pointing to its unmatched records, but budgets were shrinking and priorities shifting. In 1998, the final operational SR-71s were retired, closing a chapter that had lasted over 3 decades. Pilots, crews, and enthusiasts mourned, knowing that they were witnessing the end of something that might never come again. Yet endings can become myths. The Blackbird never lost a single aircraft to enemy fire. It holds the record for the fastest air-breathing aircraft in history, a record that still stands today. Even decades after retirement, when visitors see one resting in a museum, its lines still look alien, futuristic, untouchable. Children stare at it with wide eyes, adults whisper in awe, and engineers still puzzle over how such a machine was even possible in the 1960s. Its presence transcends its time, reminding us that once humanity dared to build something that lived on the very edge of physics, something that could turn the planet beneath into a blur. The Blackbird's true cost was not only measured in dollars or hours of maintenance. Its true cost was in the decision to end it, in the realization that even the most legendary machines cannot outrun the gravity of politics. But perhaps that is what makes its story enduring. It was the rare case where engineers, pilots, and dreamers achieved the impossible, and when they did, the world realized it might never see anything like it again. And as visitors stand beneath its towering nose in silence, the same thought echoes in their minds. If we once built this, what else might still be possible if we dared?